Welcome to the 2021-2022 World Language Webinar Series. This is our first broadcast for this school year, and today's focus, when we're thinking about implementing our state standards, is the Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning, or TEL, environment domain. And we're going to look specifically at EN4 Part 1. You see it pictured there on the screen to the left. But we're going to take a close look at it today and reflect on our teaching and our students' learning. Today's agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to start with some welcome and introductions to everyone here. We're going to do an overview of the TEL criteria and its sub-criteria that we're talking about. And there you see EN4 on the screen. The teacher creates an environment focused on language performance and proficiency. Then we'll look at reflecting on implementing EN4 with our proficiency-based North Carolina World Language Essential Standards, our state standards. We'll also talk about evidence of EN4 characteristics and behaviors in K-12 world language classrooms. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some final reminders and tips, as well as answer any questions that we need to. My name is Anne Marie Gunter. I'm the World Languages Consultant at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. I am flying solo today, as they say, so as we go through our broadcast today, I'm the only one behind the controls running things. So if you have a question or something like that, please submit it into the chat box, but be patient. I may be getting to it as part of our presentation, or I may need to wait until we get to an activity where everyone's working so I can respond, just like any teacher. All right, so let's begin with our welcome and introductions. First and foremost, I want you to take a look at your WebEx event control panel. This is just an example of what you have, of course, and your layout may be a bit different depending on what kind of computer you joined us on today, a PC or a Mac, or what kind of device, as well as which browser you chose. I know some of you have joined via telephone as well, and that's great too. So just take a moment. Starting on the right-hand side, there's some instructions here about how you can change your video layout to control where you see things on your screen. There's also a floating panel view and some things like that. In the middle of your screen, there should be some meeting controls. Now those hide when you're not using them, and then they reappear when you move your cursor on the screen. Notice that everyone is on mute and no one's using their webcam, and that's to save our Wi-Fi connections a little bit and not stress them. But also, you'll have a chance to look at the chat box. That's that little bubble there. And when we're done, you can go ahead and click the little X on the red button, and that will exit you from the webinar. If you accidentally hit that button beforehand, don't worry. You can use the same link you used before to get back into the broadcast. No problem at all. And then, of course, you always have a space to access your meeting details. I also want to do some introductions to actually our future guest speakers. Today, as I said, I'm the only presenter, but that's because we're just getting started, and this is part 1 of our EN4 of our series. But going forward, we will have other world language teachers joining us who have distinguished themselves by earning either Teacher of the Year accolades from FLANC, the Foreign Language Association of North Carolina, or our statewide virtual school, NC Virtual, or they've earned their Global Educator Digital Badge, GEDB, as a world language educator. And so they'll be sharing with us about things from their classrooms and their programs and how they implement these TEL criteria and sub-criteria we're talking about as a way to look more closely at our state standards. Also, just so you know, I do have links I will occasionally put in the chat box to share with everyone. This is a good time to share this one. If you're curious about, for example, the FLANC Teacher of the Year Award, or the NC Virtual, or the NC Global Educator Digital Badge, I just put in the chat box links to all of those things where you can go to get more information. I will, of course, post all of our links and things like that as part of our webinar archives. So let's do some introductions with you. I'm going to start with a couple of poll questions. WebEx has a great poll feature that works really well. And like any teacher, I want to know what motivated you to participate in this webinar today? What's driving you there? And this is one of those questions you can check all that apply. Did you want to access professional development made for world languages? Did you want to earn 1 contact hour for license renewal? Are you gathering information to share with others? Did you just want to learn about implementing our state standards from other world language teachers? Or maybe you wanted to find out more about our state standards, the resources, our policies, or something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and activate the poll. And in your control panel, you should be able to see that poll come up, and you should be able to click on the answers that you want. So just click on this responses you want, all that apply for you today. You can see we set ourselves a time limit, but I think we'll probably be done pretty quickly. And if you are joining us by phone or some kind of device where you can't see the poll, that's okay. Just do the best you can. Again, sometimes our devices display things differently. All right, looks like almost everyone's put their answer in. We have about 15 seconds left to go on our clock to let us know. All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and display the results so you can see them too. They should come up right in your control panel. It looks like people have a lot of reasons for joining us today. The number one reason, over 75% of you said you're here to access professional development made for world languages. And that's always so important for us. That's one of the reasons why we do this webinar series annually, so that we can connect as world language educators and really have something that looks carefully and closely at our state standards. There are also a fair number of you here to earn a contact hour for license renewal, gather information to share with others, or find out more about our state standards and resources and so forth. And that's great too. You do earn a contact hour for your active participation in this broadcast. And I'll talk a little later about how you'll get that information and how it will be sent to you via email. You're always welcome to gather this information and share with others. I will post these materials, the slides, the recording, the handouts, the links, all of that, so that you can access it and use that for local presentations, whether that's formal presentations where you take the slides and reuse them, or maybe just adapt some of them and modify them for whatever you need. And finally, there are some people here who want to learn about implementing our state standards from other world language teachers, and that's great too. That's one of the things that teachers do best, is learn from each other. And so that's what we're going to focus on today in several of our activities. All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and move on then. Well, the other thing I want to know is, where are you joining us from today? You see on the screen a picture of our state divided up as the North Carolina State Board of Education districts. These are our regions, essentially. They call them districts or areas here. These are also our legislatively documented economic prosperity zones as well. So just so you know, on the State Board of Education, there's a representative from every single district across the state. I'm going to go ahead and run that next poll. And again, just put in your answer. This time it's a single answer. And of course, you may be outside of North Carolina for our broadcast today, and that's okay too. Go ahead and indicate that. We actually have two options for that, being outside of North Carolina, either in a different state or in a different country. So go ahead and share with us today where you're joining us from. All right, looks like we're finishing up quickly. We've got about 15 to 20 seconds left. Get your answer in. I hope some of you, if you're having a nice fall day, are maybe outside joining this webinar, particularly if you've been inside all day today teaching or working in some way. It's always a good time to get outside if you've got that opportunity. All right, you should be able to see our poll results. It looks we've got someone from almost everywhere. We've got the most people from the North Central District 3 and the Piedmont Triad District 5, but we've got people from every single location, including outside of North Carolina. So we're quite a varied group today. Thanks so much for joining us. So let's get into our content and talk about the TEL criteria and its sub-criteria, and particularly to focus on this EN4, which is about environment. So think about your classroom environment, but also your teaching environment and a learning environment that you put together for your students. First and foremost, I wanted to share with you about why TEL criteria EN4 was chosen and how it supports our North Carolina World Language Essential Standards, or WLES as we call them for short, for our state standards. Some of you may recognize this screen because this is a screenshot of page 1 of our Administrator Guides for World Languages, and it's right out of what we did in last year's webinar series if you were part of that. We actually chose 5 TEL criteria. I'm sure you figured out by now it's the same 5 we're going to be looking at more closely this year that worked most closely with our state standards to help us be effective educators when we implement those state standards. And so you see the EN4 that looks at an environment focused on language performance and proficiency links right into that section it's pointing to about in the actual proficiency guidelines. Each proficiency level has a description of what students can do with language at each level and with each communication skill. And then it goes on to talk about how skills progress at different levels due to a number of factors: motivation, time and quality of instruction, informal exposure, age of students. All of those things make a big difference, obviously, when we're teaching and students are learning. And so that's why we're focusing on EN4, is to really think about our proficiency-based WLES and what that means to us in the classroom, and what we should be thinking about when we think about effective implementation of proficiency-based standards. So this is our second activity. I want you to download the handout. It's simply the TEL environment domain document that you see there on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and put, again, in the chat box, the links for you to do that. I'm also going to put the links to our administrator guides. It seems like most of you are probably familiar with those, but you can access those on our website as part of our instructional toolkit. But for today, I want you to download the TEL environment domain criteria document. And I want you to get the one from 2019. The TEL project has been around for some time now, and they had their initial publications in 2014, but they have updated those and refreshed them, so we'll be using the most recent documents. So you can get that from our chat box, and when you click on that link for the chat box one, you'll simply get a PDF that's in our Google Drive, and so you'll have that on your screen and on hand. You can also go to the World Language Webinar Series webpage with that second link and click on the environment document there and get the same kind of thing to download. Or you can go to the TEL framework webpage from the TEL project itself. It's a national project done through the University of Maryland. And you can see all of the TEL domain documents there. There are 7 total, but we're just focusing on the environment one today. So go ahead and take a minute, download a copy for yourself, and then skim through the 6 lettered sub-criteria for this session's focus for EN4, because there are A through F sub-criteria that we're going to be taking a look at. So I'll pause for a moment while you do that. All right, I hope you've downloaded a copy by now. And as I said, I'll also post these links and so forth in our archives, so don't worry about that. But I want everyone to have a copy right in front of them as we take a closer look at EN4 and really think about what we can learn from that about our own teaching. So let's go ahead and talk about reflecting on implementing EN4 with our North Carolina World Language Essential Standards. First and foremost, we always want to look carefully at what the sub-criteria say and think about what that would actually look or sound or be like in our classrooms. So the first subcriteria, A, says the teacher conveys the message that all students can learn a language. And think about that for a moment as a teacher. How do you convey a message to your students? And particularly, how do you convey to them that they can learn a language? That positive approach that every student can learn a world language. Maybe think about the messages you send when you speak with them or when you talk to their parents or guardians. Um, think about the messages you send when you post things, let's say for their homework, or maybe in a newsletter, or on a Twitter feed or a Facebook page or some other way you have to communicate with them. And consider too how that message is being conveyed within your own classroom, whether you have an in-person classroom and you can put up posters or decorations all your own, or whether you travel by cart as a teacher and have to think more creatively about how to post messages, let's say, in your classroom, or maybe you teach online in a virtual environment. And again, how do you convey that message to students? Subcriteria B continues along that and says the teacher displays and refers to information about performance and proficiency targets. So here's some very specific things about displaying information for students. And again, maybe in your classroom as a poster or information, maybe sharing that in publications or things that you post online, and also referring to that information about their performance and the proficiency targets for the class that you're teaching. Because all of our courses in the state standards have proficiency targets or outcomes that students are working towards by the end of the course or the program. So what do you display or refer to when you talk to your students or communicate with your students about performance and proficiency targets? Subcriteria C goes a little bit further and says the teacher ensures there's a space where the daily learning targets and the sequence of learning activities are always posted. So again, think about your classroom space, whether that's in person or face-to-face, or online, or in some sort of hybrid environment. But where in that learning space do you have your daily learning targets posted and your sequence of activities for the day? And that may be somewhere obvious to all students. It may be someplace that you keep so that when maybe your principal or someone else comes in that they can quickly see, depending on the age of your students and what kind of environment you teach in. Or you may have some other way that you share those daily learning targets and the sequence of activities. The next one, D, says the teacher creates an environment that supports student use of the target language. Now we all know, of course, that our goal is to be 90% in the target language or more, 90% of the time. And so think for a moment how you create an environment that supports the student use of the target language. So you as the teacher are using the target language 90% of the time or more when you speak or sign or write or do any of the things in the classroom that you're working with your students on. But also, how do you create that environment that supports the students using the target language 90% of the time or more? Next up is E. The teacher establishes an environment that facilitates student-to-student communication. And this is really critical, of course, for our first essential standard, interpersonal communication. That student-to-student communication that you use for activities and things like that to get your students talking or signing together, and maybe even writing together in an informal way, let's say in texting activities or something like that. But think about the environment you create for them that helps them know they can do that, that encourages them to talk to each other or sign with each other, that helps them know it's a safe place to make mistakes if that happens, and to get feedback and to do better with the language they're learning and how they're communicating in it. And finally, F subcriteria. The teacher displays current samples of student work and the accompanying rubrics. And this is another opportunity to think really creatively as a teacher. Where do you display your student work? Is it within the classroom on a bulletin board if you have an in-person class? Is it out in the hallway or in some other space in the school? If you're in an online environment, either full-time teaching or maybe have an online space that your students and others can access and see what you're doing, is there a place there where you can post student work and others can see it? In addition to that, is there a place where you can post the work and show the rubrics or the project information that really helps people understand what your students have accomplished? So these are our 6 sub-criteria for EN4 when we think about the environment. So what I want to ask you in this next poll question is, for the EN4 sub-criteria, and here they all are again on the screen, when you think about your teaching and how your students learn, which of these sub-criteria are professional strengths for you? Now you can choose up to 3 of these. You may have more. You may know that all 6 are strengths for you, and that's great. But I want you to really focus in on the major professional strengths you have. Which of these sub-criteria are your personal professional strengths? So I'll go ahead and start our poll, and you can put your answers in. We've got about 15 seconds left, so get your answers up there. Remember, you can choose up to 3 that are your professional strengths out of these sub-criteria. All right, let's take a look at the answers. And as you can see, there are teachers here today with all kinds of strengths and ways that they could share what they do in their classroom that make this EN4 come to life for their students. We have a lot of strengths, it looks like, on subcriteria A, about teachers conveying the message that all students can learn a language, always that very positive and proactive approach. We also have about 60% who said D is a strength of theirs, where they can create an environment that supports student use of the target language in addition to teacher use. Wonderful. In addition, we've got people who, about 40%, a little over 40%, who believe that C and E are strengths for them, where they are posting their daily learning targets and the sequence of learning activities, or they're establishing an environment that facilitates that student-to-student communication. And finally, there are some people too who see F as a professional strength, where they display current samples of student work and accompanying rubrics. Fantastic. Okay. Now I'm going to leave that information out there so you can see it, because it kind of goes along with our next activity here. This is called Waterfall in the chat. You may have heard it called Flood the Chat too, but I kind of like Waterfall better because you get these great pictures like we have on the screen there, and you think about waterfall and a beautiful display of what we're about to talk about. So we're going to do a waterfall in the chat for our EN4 sub-criteria. So what I want you to do is, in the chat box, and this is why I want to check that everyone can send messages to all attendees, because I want everyone to see your response. I want you to type the letter of one sub-criteria that you think is important in implementing the World Language Essential Standards. It can be a professional strength for you, but it doesn't have to be. So A through F, which letter do you think is a sub-criteria that is important in implementing our state standards? Then, after you type the letter, in 15 words or less, explain why you think this sub-criteria is critical for our state standards. What makes it so important, in your opinion? But don't send that to anyone until I say go, because when I say that, I want you to click enter and show us your letter and your answer, your explanation, so that we see a waterfall of responses. All right, so let's do some thinking. Go ahead and start typing this in the chat box. Remember, you want to set it to send to all attendees, and I will tell you when we can do our waterfall. So I'm going to put us on a quick timer, and I'll let you know when we're there. All right, we've got about a minute left. So I hope you've typed your letter and starting to type your explanation. We have to be careful as language teachers because words are our friend, of course, and it's easy to go over our 15 words, but I wanted to be short and to the point so that we could quickly go through them and see a beautiful waterfall of responses for the EN4 sub-criteria. All right, there's our 2 minutes. Go ahead and go. It looks like some of you have already jumped in, but go ahead and add your answer to our waterfall in the chat. Let's just take a moment and read through what people are saying about why these different sub-criteria are so critical in implementing our state standards. Got a great variety of answers. A seems to be a very prominent one today. So if you take a look, people cited different reasons for choosing A. Sometimes they said all students need to feel comfortable and know they can learn. Keeping students motivated, engaged, and accountable for their language learning is key to success. Creating a safe environment for students to practice the language is important. And one person said this sub-criteria is critical because it hinges on the belief that all students can learn a language, which drives our world language classes. And we even had someone say, because English is my second language, I thought I'd be able to speak another language, and I speak four. So a teacher conveying a message that all students can learn a language helps someone become multilingual. All right. We also have people choosing D as the critical one for implementing our world language essential standards, and for reasons like students need the opportunity to use the language in order to truly learn the language. That's always true. We also had someone say that it's D because students build confidence and they take risks while applying skills they have learned. And getting students to take risks, especially in their learning, is important. And it's a good place to learn that is in the world language classroom. And finally, we have some folks who chose E. One person said E is important because it helps create a language acquisition network. Very true. With that environment, that student-to-student communication. And also E because it provides a safe environment to interact and improve proficiency. And this teacher says they always allow students to see they're not alone in their language learning. That's such an important message for all of us because language learning is a lifelong endeavor for everyone. Well, as you might guess, with this activity, there are no wrong answers. All of these sub-criteria are important in implementing our state standards and helping our students have the environment they need that's focused on language performance and proficiency. So thank you for sharing all of your answers. We will continue on. Now we're going to get into a part of our broadcast today where we're going to look at evidence. And I like this part because, you know, when we think about evidence, often we think about student work, but it also gives us a chance to really focus in on what we have to do as teachers to show that we are enacting the sub-criteria of EN4. And I want us to think very specifically about the characteristics and behaviors that go with these sub-criteria in our K-12 world language classrooms. And I say that not just because that's part of the TEL project where they get teachers to look at those characteristics and behaviors, and in fact, even link that up to the Catalyst online tool that allows teachers to share their reflections and upload their evidence with each sub-criteria that they might choose as a goal. We'll get to that a little bit later in part 2 of our broadcast for EN4, but I want you to really think about that with characteristics and behaviors, because just like we as teachers or professionals reflect and think about what evidence do we have for this, we're asking our students to also exhibit characteristics and behaviors that show us they're language learners and that they're improving in all of their skill areas. So what's our evidence? Well, first of all, we have to ask ourselves the question, what do teachers and or students do in the classroom to show evidence of EN4 sub-criteria? So they have to take some kind of action. What are they doing, both the teachers and the students? And this is a situation where we look for answers based on the verbs in these sub-criteria. So I'm going to put them on the screen again. I know you have a document as well that has them on there. But I really want us to focus on the verbs and think about, what's it mean when we say a teacher creates an environment? What do you have to do to make that environment happen? Because you really are creating the entire learning environment for your students. Some students never get exposure or practice with the language they're learning except in your classroom. So how do you create that environment? Also, kind of like we talked before for A, how do you convey the messages to students about learning a language? And B, how do you display information or refer to information about those performance and proficiency targets that you're helping your students reach? For C, how do you ensure there is a space where daily learning targets and the sequence of learning activities are posted and available to students? And sometimes having digital environments to post that is a help, and sometimes the low-tech options are just as good. So how do you ensure that that happens? D is, again, thinking about creating an environment, but this time creating it to support the student use of target language 90% of the time or more. E looks at how a teacher establishes, or founds or grounds that environment so that students easily do student-to-student communication. And finally, F talks about the teacher displaying those samples of student work and their rubrics that go with them so that students know what it is they have to do to produce the kind of work that you would like them to show so that you can see that they're learning. So we're going to focus on those verbs, like I said. And we're going to do that using a Jamboard. And I don't know how many of you used a Jamboard before, but it is part of your Google Suite. So if you use Google Docs or Google Slides, you probably have access to Google Jamboard. I'm just going to take a moment and by a quick show of hands, I'm curious, who here has done anything with Google Jamboard before? Just raise your hand so that we can see that. If you've used Google Jamboard before. Okay, just a few of you. Well, don't worry if you haven't, because we're going to explain about how to do it. Google Jamboard is like a poster where you put sticky notes or post-it notes on it. And we're going to focus on the question, what characteristics and or behaviors would you see in a world language classroom if you were looking for evidence for one of the EN4 sub-criteria? And once again, I put a screenshot of that, but I know you have it in front of you. So again, focusing on those characteristics and behaviors, what teachers do. So I want you to think about which EN sub-criteria you want to write about. You're only going to have to pick one out of the 6 that you want to write about to answer this question. On the sticky note you create for this activity, I want you to title your post with the letter of the sub-criteria, A through F. Then write your response to the question, what characteristics and or behaviors would you see in a world language classroom if you were looking for evidence for this EN4 sub-criteria? So write that response in 2 sentences or less. And then at the end, you can include your name on the sticky or you can remain anonymous. It's totally up to you. We'll take a few minutes to check out the other ideas on the Jamboard as people are posting them. And then in total, this activity will last 6 minutes from start to finish once we begin. All right, so I do have a slide that shows you how to use Jamboard. Here it is. And our Jamboard, by the way, is going to be on a bit.ly link. You might guess just by how I've got it set up that this is the Jamboard we're also going to be using for our part 2 broadcast in several weeks. And I'll go ahead and post that Jamboard link into the chat box so you can just click on over to it yourself. And I put the direct link as well as the bit.ly link that's on the screen. So Jamboard, and you see that little symbol, that's just the Google symbol for Jamboard, has a control panel like you see here. And as you might guess, these are all different ways to write on the Jamboard, and particularly write on your sticky note. But I'm going to ask you to start by picking a sticky note, and the arrow should be pointing at this one right here. That's our sticky note. All right. And so once you click on that, your sticky note will come up like this. You can change the color of it. Right now it's checked off to be a yellow sticky note like the most common ones, but you can change to a different color if you want. Then you write your message, you put your letter for the sub-criteria you're talking about, and your answer to the question about what characteristics and behaviors would you look for in a classroom for that particular sub-criteria, or evidence of that particular sub-criteria. And then the all-important save button. And once you hit save, it posts your response to our Jamboard. So that's how it works. I'm going to go ahead and go back out to our question slide so that you can see the question that you're answering and the instructions. And I'm going to go ahead and time us for 6 minutes as you get started. I'm going to go ahead and click out here so that everybody knows what our Jamboard looks like. Oh, and I see people have already started posting their responses. So again, click on that sticky note and then type in your response. You can change the color of the sticky notes like folks have. And as you see, people are knowing very quickly they can move things around if they need to. I do have 2 different slides for this in case we run out of room on the first one, because I didn't know how many folks would be here today. All right, so let's go ahead and get started and see what your answer is to this. Wow, people are really doing well with the Jamboard. Be sure that you post your sticky. Once you're done, you save it and it will post. You can move it around as you see people doing now. Up at the top, if you want to slide to the next page because we're running out of space, you certainly can do that. You're welcome to do all of those features with a Jamboard. Also, some of you, looks like are writing quite a bit. If you want to do 2 or more stickies, you certainly can do that too. You don't have to limit yourself to just one if you've got more to share today about this question. All right, about 20 more seconds. Go ahead and make sure your sticky is visible. All right, it looks great. Wow, we have got a lot of answers. And it looks like we've got some stickies on the next page as well. Oop, and then we may even made a third page. Great. All right, well, let's take a look. There's really a lot of good information here. And so we can think about what teachers are doing and students are doing to make these characteristics and behaviors come to life in our classrooms. Notice we have a lot of answers for A and D and E again, which people also picked out as some of the most important ones in implementing our state standards. Of course, all the sub-criteria are important, and we love to see a variety of answers. Please take a moment and think about what you've added to this conversation and shared from your classroom, and what others are sharing with you. Notice we've got some practical tips about, like, for example, posters for encouraging students to learn language for A and even B. So we've got clearly some Spanish teachers who are saying encouraging posters with si se puede, as well as motivational posters with facts and statistics about why learning a language is important. We've got some people talking in D about word walls, word banks to support students' output as well as input and facilitate that communication. We've got people describing, like for E, that you would see a teacher interacting with the students and students actively communicating via different activities and tools. So paired oral or texting each other, Jamboard like this that you could use in your classroom. Maybe some think, pair, share. I see someone else is mentioning in the target language after listening to a video. So thinking about that input and that output is always important when we think about how our students use the language and become comfortable using the language. All right, well, thank you so much for sharing that. We'll come back to that, like I said, in a different way during part 2 of the EN4 broadcast, which are later in the month. Noticing our time, I do want us to finish on time today. I know it's been a busy day for everyone. So we're going to do our wrap up and reminders. The first thing I would always say to everyone is be sure you sign up for the NCDPI listservs. You see the bit.ly link there, and I'll put it in the chat box as well so that you have easy access to it. But anyone can sign up for the listservs. You may already have signed up, which is how you got information about today's broadcast. But you can also go to these signups here. I see one of my colleagues is online, Satley Stocks. I want to give a shout out to Satley because the bit.ly link you see there to sign up for our NCDPI listservs is one that she created and lets the rest of us share. So thanks, Satley. So when you go to that link, you can sign up for all the NCDPI listservs that you have an interest in. There are 4 for world languages. There's world language instructors, and the reason I have that bolded on our screen is because I will make sure that everyone who registered for today's broadcast gets added to that listserv if they're not already on it. But if you want to get added to the World Language Education News, the Dual Language Immersion or DLI Educators Listserv, or NC Linguafolio, you can sign up for those too just by following the links and putting your email address in. There are some others as well. So if you teach in other areas or have interest on things like global education or charter schools or even K-12 legislation, you can sign up for those newsletters as well. All right, well, let's go ahead and wrap up. As I said, this is our first broadcast today for our 2021-2022 World Language Webinar Series, and we start with EN4. Our next broadcast, the part 2 of this, is on Wednesday, October the 20th at the same time. Our broadcasts are always on Wednesdays from 4 to 5 for this webinar series. I like to call that our World Language Wednesdays. That's even a Twitter hashtag we use. If you do want to register for this broadcast, I'm putting the registration link in the chat box right now so that you can get to it, but it's also embedded on these slides if you repurpose them later on. Also, as it says on the screen, the materials and recording from each webinar, so our presentation slides, the handouts, the hyperlinks, all of that will be posted as archives, and then you can use those resources locally or adapt them for your own professional development purposes. That's why I like to post the slides in multiple formats, so you don't have to recreate any. You can just download what's there and use them as you need to. Also, our archives will be available for a period of time and can be completed asynchronously to earn a certificate of completion. So if you like this broadcast, but you had a colleague who couldn't join us, encourage them to go to the archives and they'll have a way to walk through this recording and do the activities as well, and then earn their own certificate of completion for today. You see I have a Canvas logo there. We are posting our archives differently this year, so please be patient with us as we get that set up, but it will be in Canvas that's accessible to everyone from a link on our website. Also, the rest of the series is yet to come. There are 10 broadcasts total, and you see on the screen that we have parts 1 and 2 for 4 other TEL sub-criteria. And so those are on the screen along with our handouts. Those are all posted on our World Language Webinar Series information page, and that's where our archives will be posted or linked additionally as well. So I will put that into the chat box so you can go right to it if you want, but it is on our Google site for World Languages under Professional Development for the webinar series information. Now, speaking of CEU certificates, that's a question everybody asks. First and foremost, I would say, of course, that our public school units, our districts and charter schools have to approve professional development offerings in all formats. For today, if you, since you participate in the live broadcast, you earn a contact hour towards the CEU for renewal. That will come in the form of an email with an attached certificate of attendance approximately 1 week from today. Every now and then we get them turned around faster, but please give us about a week to process everything from the broadcast and get your certificate to you. Also, the archives will be available for a period of time, and they can be completed, as I said, by individuals asynchronously to earn a certificate of completion for license renewal. So those are 2 options available for everyone. Those options, by the way, will be available for all of the broadcasts that we do this year in this series. So there's always a way to get your certificate of attendance by attending the live broadcast, or if you can't, but you still are interested in the materials and let's say register or come back to it later, you can then go into our Canvas space that we'll have set up for that. We won't have those available forever, but there will be a period of time, several weeks, of course, after a broadcast has been posted in the archives that you can access and complete it asynchronously. That's it for today. We have finally finished on time and just a little early to take care of any final questions. This is our NCDPI World Languages team. So as I told you at the beginning, I'm Anne-Marie Gunter, your World Languages consultant at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. Feel free to contact me via email, via phone, take a look at the Google site, or even meet me on Twitter. I'm at Anne-Marie Gunter, and we use the Twitter hashtag World Language or WL Wednesdays. Also, you can contact my supervisor, that's Dr. Stacy Daniel. You see her picture there. Same thing with email or phone. I think Dr. Daniel is on the line today, as are, like I said, some of my other colleagues. So thank you all for attending. And then, of course, we can't ever forget Teresa Parker. She's our administrative specialist for ELA and languages section that works with us. And she's the one who will be emailing your certificates to you. So look for that email from her. All right. That's the end of our webinar. Again, I thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording so the system can start processing it.